What if a prison in early modern London allowed wealthy prisoners to live in private rooms with servants, while poor prisoners slept on straw and relied on charity to survive? And what if, at the very same time, couples arrived at the prison gates, not to visit inmates but to secretly get married? This was the reality of Fleet Prison, one of the most unusual institutions in early modern England. It was not simply a place of confinement, but a small enclosed society. Here, wealth shaped comfort, poverty meant hardship, and marriages took place behind prison walls. Fleet Prison stood beside the River Fleet, just outside the City of London. In the 17th century, London was expanding rapidly, and credit played a major role in everyday life. Merchants borrowed money to finance trade, landowners took loans to maintain estates, and shopkeepers purchased goods on credit. When individuals could not repay their debts, creditors could have them arrested. Instead of immediate punishment, debtors were confined until they settled what they owed. Fleet Prison became one of the main institutions used for this type of imprisonment. From the moment prisoners entered Fleet Prison, wealth determined everything. The prison operated on a fee-based system. Prisoners had to pay for rooms, food, bedding, and privileges. Those without money endured overcrowding, hunger, and uncertainty. Those with money could purchase comfort and mobility. Wealthy prisoners often rented private chambers inside the prison. These rooms were far more comfortable than the common wards. Some chambers included beds, chairs, fireplaces, and windows. Prisoners sometimes brought their own furniture and personal belongings. Instead of dark cells, they lived in spaces that resembled small apartments. Food for wealthy prisoners was also very different. They could purchase meals, order wine, and even hire servants to cook. Meals were sometimes shared with visitors. This turned imprisonment into a social experience rather than isolation. Visitors played an important role in the lives of wealthy prisoners. Family members, lawyers, business partners, and friends entered regularly. In some cases, wives and children lived inside the prison as well. This transformed parts of Fleet Prison into small domestic households. Daily life for wealthy prisoners often resembled life outside. They woke in private rooms, met visitors, and continued business activities. Merchants arranged repayment plans and negotiated debts. Some prisoners even ran small enterprises inside the prison. Poor prisoners lived in completely different conditions. They were confined to the common side of the prison. These wards were overcrowded and uncomfortable. Many slept on straw or directly on the floor. Ventilation was poor and disease spread easily. Clothing became worn and blankets were scarce. Food was one of the greatest difficulties. Poor prisoners had to pay for meals, but many had no money. They depended on charity from visitors and religious groups. Hunger was common, and survival was uncertain. Fleet Prison also became famous for weddings. Couples came to the prison to marry quickly and secretly. These ceremonies later became known as fleet marriages. Because rules were looser than in parish churches, couples could avoid formal procedures. Clergy connected to the prison performed these ceremonies. Some marriages were completed within hours. The weddings at Fleet Prison were one of the most unusual and famous aspects of the prison's history. These ceremonies became known as fleet marriages, and they were popular because they were fast, informal, and often secret. Unlike traditional weddings in parish churches, which followed strict legal and religious rules, marriages at Fleet Prison could be arranged quickly, with very little oversight. Many couples went to Fleet Prison because they wanted to marry without parental permission. In 17th and early 18th century England, family approval was often expected. Young couples who wanted to marry against their family's wishes chose Fleet Prison. To avoid interference, There they could complete the ceremony quickly, sometimes within the same day. Another reason couples chose Fleet Prison was to avoid the publication of bans. Normally, weddings required announcements in the local parish church for 3 consecutive Sundays. These announcements allowed anyone to object to the marriage. At Fleet Prison, these formalities were frequently ignored. This allowed couples to marry discreetly without public attention. The weddings could take place in small rooms, rented chambers. The setting was usually informal, sometimes lit only by candles, with just a few witnesses present. Because the process was so quick, a couple could arrive, pay a fee, gather witnesses, and be married within minutes. Records were sometimes incomplete and documentation varied. This led to disputes in some cases, especially when families challenged the marriage. After the ceremony, small celebrations often followed. Wealthy prisoners sometimes hosted modest gatherings in private chambers. Fleet marriages became so common that Fleet Prison gained a reputation. Throughout London, people traveled specifically to marry there. By the 18th century, thousands of marriages were performed. However, concerns grew about the lack of regulation. In 1753, the Marriage Act introduced stricter requirements. This law required formal registration and authorized churches. The act effectively ended fleet marriages. Even after they ended, fleet marriages remained famous. They illustrate how Fleet Prison was more than a place of confinement. It was a place where people negotiated debts, lived with families, and even began married life. Did you already know about Fleet Prison? Its wealthy inmates, poor prisoners, and secret weddings. Comment below and tell me which historical prison you would like to learn about next. If you want to dive deeper into Fleet Prison, including sources, images, and historical references, all the links are available in the description below. Go take a look. Over time, criticism of debtor prisons increased. Many argued that imprisoning debtors only made repayment more difficult, since confinement prevented them from working. As legal reforms gradually reduced imprisonment for debt, Fleet Prison began to lose its original purpose. The prison was finally closed in 1842, ending centuries of confinement and unequal living conditions. Only a few years later, in 1846, the buildings were demolished as London continued to expand. The prison disappeared from the city landscape, but its unusual history remained. Fleet Prison had been a place where poverty and privilege existed side by side, and where, behind prison walls, people not only lived in confinement, but also began new lives through marriage.